All right, y'all. So this is 7.4, Women and Economic Development. And so what we're going to look at today is the different roles of women whoops, what's going on there? Roles of women, how they change as countries develop economically, looking at things like differences in wages and employment opportunities. And then we're going to look at microloans and look at their role in hopefully helping to bring women out of poverty in developing countries. So microloans are more of a developing country thing. So let's take a look real quick. So obviously, women suffer from a lot of different types of challenges. We'll say there's one nice word for it. These are the other more appropriate words for it. So flat out discrimination. There can be lack of access to good jobs, unequal pay, lack of advancement. You may have heard this term, the glass ceiling. A glass ceiling is this kind of invisible barrier for women in the workforce in terms of upward mobility. You know, going from management to upper management, and so it's the lack of ability for women to rise up into the positions of power within an organization and political. You know, we still have a political glass ceiling. We haven't had a female president yet, and so Kamala Harris, she broke uh, the ceiling for vice presidency, but we're still not quite there yet on female presidents in the U.S. So, anyway, so let's take a look at how women's roles change in an economy as economies start to develop. And so, in low-income countries, we generally see women taking a bigger role in food production. All right, they are about 43% of the workforce, but they make up about 70% of food production. All right, and so their role is critical in terms of food production. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, you know, they have this large impact and large participation in the agricultural sector, but very low land ownership. All right, and so that creates a problem because it's the owners of the things that tend to make more money than not. So that would be generally a role of, you know, in general, role of women in lower income countries. When countries move into this middle income category, they start to see manufacturing come into their countries, and oftentimes those manufacturers will try to employ women for a couple of different reasons. There is oftentimes a large availability of women who can come in and supply that labor, and also women will tend to accept lower pay for their work, and so. As a result of those two things, you often see in these middle income countries women coming into the workforce and taking these manufacturing jobs. In these middle income countries, there are very, very few women in upper management positions. And so in low income countries, it's not unheard of, but it is exceptionally rare. Middle income countries, it's still rare. And then when we get to higher income countries, we do see more women in upper management, but it is not nearly the representation of, it's not equal representation between men and women. So, and once we get into high income countries, women are more fully integrated in the workforce. So if you look at the labor force participation rate of both men and women, you know, women account roughly for about 50% of the workforce in developed countries. But we do still see this issue with pay gaps existing for comparable jobs. You've heard some of the stats, you know, for every dollar a male makes, and these numbers range, you know, it could be from like 71 cents up to 88 cents, something like that a woman makes. And so let's take a look. We'll come back to that in just a second. Let's take a look at the gender wage gap across the globe. So if you take a look at this score, this is from 2016 down here. One is good. All right, so score up to one. One would be the best, complete equality in wages, and then zero is the worst. All right, and so you can kind of see where countries fall. And again, you know, how these things are measured does make a difference, but this does give us a general impression of what's going on in the world and where things are more or less equal in terms of pay. All righty, and so you can see the U.S. falls here. And so there would be some economists that would disagree with how this is calculated, but and we'll look at why these numbers, why there might be a gap. But again, you get the idea of where there's more equality and less equality. The country of Rwanda here, they have, it's nearly complete equality, not quite, but pretty close. You can see some of these Northern European countries, but anyway, uh, so let's get into some of the reasons for this pay gap, and these are some legitimate reasons, backed up by research. They aren't excuses, but they are some of the reasons why there might be a pay gap. So uh, sometimes there's what they call a motherhood penalty. It's not anything that anybody would say, "Hey, you just had a kid, we're going to penalize you," but it is women taking the time off to have a child. It's kind of seen that for every child, a woman loses about 5% of her pay compared to a man. All right. Some women avoid negotiating a salary, but there could be the flip side, and that could be because they don't want to be seen as being demanding, and uh, that could be an issue. Men tend to negotiate more than women, but the question is, why is that? And there might be a fear that the perception is, hey, I don't want to come across as being too demanding, whereas a guy might have a very different take on that. In a lot of societies, women do choose lower paying jobs, but uh, when you start to look at things like, comparing equal, men and women graduating college. So if when men and women graduate college and they account for things like occupation, hours worked, age, college major, all that kind of stuff, 1 year after graduation, women were earning about 82% of what men were earning. All right, and so that's a year out, accounting for these factors. All right, and so there's still something there. 10 years after graduation, women were earning 69%. That's not taking these into consideration. So when they did that, there was still 12% of their earnings that were not explained by any of these factors. And so what's left? You know, this is one thing that might come to mind, some form of discrimination, gender discrimination. And so another issue would be underrepresentation in leadership. So corporate leadership, especially, the corporate leadership is where you start making the big money. And so women are definitely underrepresented there. The number of working hours, women tend to work fewer hours. But again, you need to ask yourself why, and that is often because they are taking the role of caregiver at home and they don't have those extra hours to put into work because somebody's got to take care of the kids at home. All right. And then finally, still, women do make up a smaller percentage of STEM jobs, the science, math, engineering, those kind of jobs. And it might be harder for women to get into these industries because they have been historically more male dominated, which just puts up a little bit more of a roadblock trying to get into those. Doesn't mean that they're not there by any stretch, but there is still an underrepresentation of women in those types of jobs. And so these are some of those reasons for the pay gaps, but they're not all explained away through this variable or this variable or this variable. This could be definitely part of it, and that's where when we look at this number, that's definitely part of it. All right, and so let's take a look. This is what they call the Women's Economic Opportunity Index, and here's some of the things that they look at: labor policy within a country, access to finance, so that would be like loans. All right, education and training within a country, women's legal and social status, and the general business environment. And so these are scaled from 0 to 100, 100 being the most opportunity and 0 being the least. And so you can kind of, again, see where countries rate. Australia's rating pretty well. Most of Western Europe's rating well. Canada's a little bit better than the US, but the US is still rating relatively well. And so, taking into account all of these different policies, this gives you kind of a picture of where it's where the economic opportunities are. All right. And so let's take a look at this gender inequality index. We talked about this in the last unit, and then the human development index, and then gross national income per capita, and see if there's any kind of correlation between any of these. So again, human development, 1 is good, makes people happy, and 0 is bad. Gender inequality index, 1 is bad and 0 is good. All right, so kind of got to make sure to reverse those. And then here's the GNI per capita, and this is a little bit dated information, but not too bad. So if we look at France, pretty high GNI per capita, very high on the Human Development Index, and low in a good way on the Gender Inequality Index. And so what we're trying to see is, are there any correlations? We're not talking causation, but any correlation. So again, high GNI per capita, high human development, low Gender Inequality Index, which is good, okay? Argentina is kind of middle income country. And so we see their Human Development Index start to drop. And remember, Human Development Index takes into account GNI. And so if this number goes down, it's necessarily going to cause that number to go down. But look at Argentina's Gender Inequality Index, and now it starts to tick up. All right, Kenya, very low GNI per capita, not the lowest by any stretch, but relatively low given this data. So low there. The Human Development Index drops even further, and the Gender Inequality Index gets even worse. And then we have China. Their Human Development Index is a little bit higher. And so what I want you to see is that these three numbers tend to track together, okay? Not saying that one causes the other, but there is some type of relationship between, gender inequality, income per capita, and overall Human Development Index. All right, and then the last thing is that we're going to look at is microloans. And so microloans are provided either by individuals or by NGOs. Make sure you know this, non-governmental organizations. Those are just organizations that go into different areas and try to help people out within that country, but they're not associated with a specific government. All right, so like the government of the United States, they don't do this. This would be a non-governmental organization from the United States might come in and do it. But here's the idea: offer small amounts, small loan amounts, and it's often to women because women are kind of the key to getting a lot of these countries out of their low income status. All right, and so a lot of this financing is done because women may not qualify based on any traditional loan qualification way that we judge people. Okay, and so if you go in to borrow money in the U.S. for a house, they're going to look at your job, they're going to look at your credit history, they're going to look at a few different things. And so women in developing countries, and a lot of people in general, they're not going to have necessarily that history of, hey, how have you been paying back your loans? Because they haven't had them before. And so anyway, so they might get these small loans to start these very small businesses, and that can help bring up these communities. Now, one of the issues that may arise is that it could create what they call a debt trap, meaning that if women can't repay these loans, then they have to borrow more, and that becomes a problem, because if you keep borrowing, now you're just working to pay off debt. You're not working to build and grow your situation economically. You're working to pay off this debt. So what I want to do is watch this quick, I think it's about a 4-minute video. This kind of gives a decent overview of microloans and some of the problems that can arise. And they do talk about the regulation of these microloans, meaning that trying to figure out what are people doing with the money, because if you're just borrowing money for consumption to buy stuff, that doesn't do you any good. That makes everything generally worse off. So these are there's great potential with microloans, but there are also some downsides to it. So let's watch this, and this is the last part of this video.
Microfinance provides financial services to the poorest of the poor. It involves, among other things, extending loans sometimes as small as $20 or $30 so that people can start businesses, generate income for their families, and begin the climb out of poverty. In many cases, over 90% of the borrowers are women.
If I'm empowered with financial support to work and take care of my family, I can pay for health service. I can pay for school, I can do this and do that. All this brings about developments.
Microfinance has done a lot of good, but even its greatest proponents agree it has to be done right. Otherwise, if you just lend money, people can actually be worse off than they were before.
There are a lot of problems in the microcredit movement itself. The definition of microcredit is being misused by many people. Anything under the sun is called as microcredit. So you need to clarify yourself. What do you mean by microcredit?
What distinguishes microfinance, say, from the moneylender or the more modern variant of that, the consumer credit outfit, is exactly this merchant banking aspect. That as a microfinance institution, you have to know the business of your client. Now, if you don't watch what the money is used for, then chances are a large part of it is going to be used for consumption. And if you borrow to consume, you're not richer at the end, you're poorer, because you have to repay the loan and high interest on top of it. And so what makes a microfinance institution really worth its name is the ability to detect among the thousands and thousands that would gratefully accept a loan, those that will become productive with that loan, that can turn that loan into value and better their lives. It's not easy to do, but that good microfinance institution, that's exactly what it does.
Damian von Stauffenberg founded MicroRate, a company that rates the effectiveness of microfinance institutions around the world. What he's found is that the best microfinance strategies emphasize a holistic approach. Ibo Graham, a project manager at the Hopeline Institute in Ghana, echoes the same idea.
Hopeline is a microfinance NGO. We have about 2,500 members. Every person who registers with Hopeline will have to go through a month of training on business management, bookkeeping. They have to understand insurance because we'll give them micro insurance. They have to understand what savings is. We're teaching them how to save. If you save, you can be empowered.
So I'm going to cut that short there, but you get the idea. So when these NGOs go into developing areas and they offer these loans, if the loans are used, as the intent is to help start and grow a small business, maybe, then that can be very good. But the danger of microloans is, as the gentleman said, that if you're borrowing it to consume, then your consumption may be done, but you still owe money, and so that can put you in a worse place. So anyways, that's what we mean by microfinance. And let me make sure, I'm pretty sure that's the end of this. I did want to show you this one more thing. This is looking at microfinance throughout the world. And so you can see 48.3 billion loaned here, 37 to males, 63% to female. In South Asia, a whole lot, 36.8 billion, again, 89% to female, 11% to male. And you can see down here, this little corn thing means the proportion of rural borrowers. So 70% of the loans were to rural people, 62% here. This is Eastern Central Europe, a smaller number. Africa, 38 and 64% male to female, with 60% going to rural. Middle East. So you can read all these numbers and get a sense for it. But here's the global amount: 124 billion in microfinance. And of all those people, 20% were male, 80% female, 65% lived in rural areas. And so, you can see, and this is the evolution of portfolio at risk. Don't worry about that. That is possible default on those loans. And so that's definitely gone up. You don't want, and by portfolio, they just mean the different loans that are out there. And this is number of active borrowers. So you can see that it's been going up since 2009 and before. And so anyway, in gross loan portfolio, that is just how much money is lent. All right. So that should be it. All righty. Y'all take care.